Imagine a vast empire stretching from the Siberian forests to the tropical jungles of Southeast Asia. An empire of stunning palaces, profound philosophy, and immense wealth. This was the Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China. Its rulers, the Manchus, commanded one of the largest and most populous empires on earth for over 2.5 centuries. But in the face of immense internal pressures and the relentless advance of the modern world, this mighty dynasty would ultimately crumble, paving the way for the birth of modern China. How did it all happen? Let's find out. Our story begins not in the heart of China, but to its northeast, in Manchuria. In the early 17th century, a chieftain named Narachi united the various Jurchen tribes, laying the foundation for what would become the Manchu state. His son, Hong Tiji, officially proclaimed the Qing dynasty. At this time, the ruling Ming dynasty in China was in a state of terminal decline. Widespread farm-and-peasant rebellions and crippling corruption had weakened its grip on power. The final blow came in 1644 when a rebel army led by Li Zicheng captured the capital, Beijing, and the last Ming emperor took his own life. Seeing an opportunity, the Manchus, allied with a defecting Ming general, swept south of the Great Wall and seized Beijing for themselves. But this was just the beginning. The conquest of the rest of China was a long and often brutal process, taking several decades to complete. By the late 17th century, under the capable rule of emperors like Kangxi, the Qing had consolidated their control, establishing a new era of Manchu rule over the vast Chinese empire. The 18th century marked the zenith of Qing power. Under the successive reigns of the Kangxi Yongzhang and Qianlong emperors, the empire experienced a period of remarkable stability and prosperity. This was also an age of unprecedented territorial expansion. Through a series of brilliant military campaigns, the Qing armies pushed the empire's borders farther than ever before. They conquered Mongolia, bringing the various Mongol tribes under their control. They annexed the vast region of Xinjiang, incorporating the Tarim Basin and the Yongar heartland. They established a protectorate over Tibet, asserting Chinese authority over the Dalai Lama, and they expanded into Taiwan and parts of Central Asia. By the end of Qianlong's reign, the Qing Empire was a true multi-ethnic behemoth, its territory rivaling that of any empire in world history. This massive expansion not only secured China's frontiers, but also brought a diverse array of peoples and cultures into the imperial fold, shaping the map of modern China in profound ways. With peace and stability came a massive population boom. The introduction of new crops from the Americas, like maize and sweet potatoes, allowed for cultivation of previously unusable land. China's population, which had been around 150 million in 1700, soared to over 400 million by the mid-19th century. While this growth was a sign of prosperity, it also placed immense strain on the empire's resources. Land became increasingly scarce, leading to smaller and smaller farm plots for peasant families. Social tensions rose as competition for land and resources intensified. Despite a thriving commercial economy with bustling cities and sophisticated trade networks, the government struggled to manage this demographic explosion. The traditional Confucian social structure, with its scholar officials at the top, remained rigid. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordered society, pressures were building. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and that spark would come from across the oceans. By the early 19th century, European powers, led by Great Britain, were eager to trade with China. However, the Qing court, viewing China as the self-sufficient center of the world, restricted all foreign trade to the single port of Canton, now Guangzhou. This Canton system heavily favored China, which sold vast quantities of tea, silk, and porcelain in exchange for silver. The British, facing a severe trade deficit, found a solution. Opium, grown in British India, the drug was smuggled into China in ever-increasing quantities. Addiction became a devastating social problem, and the flow of silver out of China to pay for the drug began to drain the economy. In 1839, the Daoguang Emperor appointed an official, Lin Zexu, to crack down on the trade. Lin confiscated and destroyed over 20,000 chests of British opium. In response, Britain declared war. The First Opium War was a disaster for China. The Qing military's traditional weapons and tactics were no match for Britain's modern steam gunboats and disciplined infantry. Defeated and humbled, the Qing government was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. This was the first of what became known as the Unequal Treaties. Under its terms, China was forced to cede the island of Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity, opened 5 new ports to foreign trade, and pay a massive indemnity. Most humiliatingly, the treaty introduced the principle of extraterritoriality, meaning British citizens in China were subject to British law, not Chinese law. This was a profound blow to Chinese sovereignty. Over the next few decades, other Western powers and even Japan forced China to sign similar treaties, carving out concessions and spheres of influence. A second Opium War from 1856 to 1860 resulted in even more concessions, including the legalization of the opium trade and the looting and burning of the magnificent Summer Palace in Beijing. The Qing dynasty was no longer the master of its own house. As the dynasty was being humiliated by foreign powers, it faced an even greater threat from within. The social and economic tensions that had been simmering for decades finally erupted into the deadliest civil war in human history, the Taiping Rebellion. It was led by a man named Hung Shuquang, a failed civil service exam candidate who, after having religious visions, declared himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ. He established the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom and raised a massive army, aiming to overthrow the Manchu rulers, whom he decried as demons. From 1850 to 1864, the rebellion ravaged southern and central China. The Taiping rebels captured the major city of Nanjing and made it their capital. The war was incredibly brutal, with both sides committing horrific atrocities. The Qing court's own banner armies proved ineffective, forcing it to rely on new regional armies raised by Han China's scholar officials like Zheng Gofan. With some help from Western mercenaries, these new armies eventually crushed the rebellion. But the cost was staggering. An estimated 20 to 30 million people died, and vast swaths of the country were left devastated. The rebellion severely weakened the central government and empowered regional military leaders, a shift in power that would have long-lasting consequences. The series of devastating military defeats and internal rebellions was a brutal wake-up call for some within the Qing ruling class. A faction of reform-minded officials argued that to survive, China had to adopt Western military technology and industrial methods. This led to the self-strengthening movement, which lasted from the 1860s to the 1890s. In 90s, the motto was Chinese learning as the essence, Western learning for practical use. The government established arsenals to build modern warships and guns, opened new shipyards, and started coal mines and telegraph lines. The first generation of Chinese students was even sent abroad to study in Europe and America. However, the movement was plagued by problems. It was never a centrally coordinated effort, and it faced deep resistance from conservative factions at court who viewed any deviation from Confucian tradition as a betrayal. Ultimately, the reforms were too superficial. They focused on technology without addressing the need for political and institutional change. The movement's failure was starkly demonstrated when China was crushingly defeated in a war with a rapidly modernizing Japan, a nation China had long considered its little brother. The defeat by Japan was the final humiliation. It proved that simply buying guns and ships wasn't enough. Anti-Manchu sentiment, which had been simmering since the Taiping Rebellion, now exploded. Revolutionary groups began to spring up both in China and among overseas Chinese communities. The most prominent leader was Sun Yat-sen, a doctor educated in the West who advocated for the overthrow of the dynasty and the establishment of a republic. The Qing court made some last-ditch efforts at reform, but it was too little, too late. The final blow came on October 10, 1911. A soldiers' uprising in the city of Wuchang quickly spiraled into a nationwide revolution. Province after province declared independence from Qing rule. The court, in desperation, turned to a powerful general, Yuan Shi, but he played both sides, negotiating with the revolutionaries while pressuring the court to abdicate. On February 12, 1912, the last emperor, a young boy named Puyi, formally abdicated the throne. The Qing dynasty, after 268 years, was over. The fall of the Qing was more than just the end of a dynasty. It was the end of over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. The empire that had once defined the world in its own image had been brought to its knees, unable to adapt to the challenges of the modern age. But its collapse was also a beginning. From the ashes of the old empire, a new nation would struggle to be born. The 20th century would be a period of turmoil, war, and revolution for China, but it would also be a period of profound transformation. The legacy of the Qing, its vast territory, its diverse population, and the memory of its rise and fall, continues to shape the identity and destiny of China today. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories from our past. See you next time.